They laughed the first time he hauled the second layer of logs up the ridge. Men stopped mid-hammer in the valley below, leaning on fence posts, squinting up through the dust and heat. From that distance, Elias Crow looked like an ant dragging entire trees behind him, one after another, day after day. "Boy's building himself a fortress," someone said. "Or a coffin," another answered. The laughter carried. Elias heard it. He always heard it. But he didn't look down. He set the log in place, adjusted the wedge, and drove the iron spike through with 3 steady blows. The sound rang sharp against the open sky, echoing across the valley like a warning no one understood yet. The cabin already looked strange from below. Too thick, too heavy, too deliberate. Most folks built with a single wall, quick, efficient, just enough to keep out wind and maybe a little cold. A second layer, if you were cautious. But free? Free walls meant time. It meant labor. It meant hauling twice as much timber up a slope no horse wanted to climb. It meant planning for something no one else believed was coming. Elias wiped sweat from his brow and stepped back. The structure rose behind him. Solid, quiet, immovable. 3 layers of hand-cut logs, each spaced with a narrow gap packed tightly with clay, straw, and ash. A system he had seen once, years ago, far north where winter didn't just visit, it ruled. No one in this valley had seen cold like that. Not yet. By late afternoon, a wagon rattled its way up the ridge. Elias didn't turn until it stopped behind him. "You aiming to build a town up here?" the driver called. "We're just trying to outdo God himself." Elias turned then. Jonas Hale climbed down from the wagon, boots hitting the dirt with a confident thud. He was smiling, the kind of smile that carried more judgment than humor. "Just building a cabin," Elias said. Jonas walked a slow circle around the structure, running his hand along the outer logs. "You've got 3 walls here," he said, almost impressed. "3? That's excessive. It'll hold heat." Jonas chuckled. "Son, winter barely bites down here. You planning for a blizzard that forgot its way?" Elias met his gaze, steady and quiet. "I'm planning for what's coming." Jonas shook his head, amused. "What's coming is you wasting half your life on a cabin no one needs." He gestured down toward the valley. "We've got good homes down there. Solid. Proven. You could have joined us. Saved yourself the trouble." Elias glanced past him, down at the scattered rooftops below, thin smoke rising lazily into a sky that had never threatened them. "Your homes are fine," he said. "For now." Jonas laughed again, louder this time. "For now," he repeated. "You hear that? The man's building for the end of the world." Elias didn't respond. Jonas climbed back into his wagon, still smiling. "Well, when you get tired of freezing alone up here, you know where to find us." The wagon rolled away. Elias watched until it disappeared down the ridge, then turned back to his work. He didn't hurry. He never did. Every log was measured. Every gap sealed. Every corner locked tight. The roof came next, thick beams layered with packed earth and a final covering of sod. It looked heavy, almost unnatural, but it would hold. It would insulate. It would trap heat the way the ground itself did. By the time the first frost brushed the valley, the cabin was complete. And the laughter hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown. They came up sometimes just to look at it. Men with calloused hands and easy confidence, circling the cabin like it was some kind of curiosity. "You building a bank vault?" one asked. "Or hiding from something?" Another said. Elias stood by, letting them talk. "You ever think maybe you overdid it?" someone asked him directly. "No," Elias said. The answer always ended the same way, with a shake of the head, a smirk, and another story carried back down the hill. By early winter, the valley settled into its usual rhythm. Thin snowfalls dusted the rooftops, but melted by midday. Fires burned low in stone hearths. Doors stayed open longer than they should have. It was easy, comfortable, predictable. And that was the problem. Elias noticed it first in the wind. A shift, subtle but wrong. It came from the north, not the usual soft currents that brushed the valley, but something sharper, colder. It cut through the trees instead of around them. He stood outside his cabin one evening, watching the sky turn a pale, brittle blue. The air felt empty, like something had been pulled out of it. That night, he sealed the final gaps around his door. Inside, the cabin held warmth even without a fire. The thick walls trapped what little heat remained from the day, holding it close, refusing to let it escape. Elias lit the stove anyway, not because he needed to, Because he knew what was coming. Down in the valley, no one noticed. Not yet. The storm arrived without warning. It didn't roll in like a normal front. No slow build-up, no gradual darkening of the sky. It fell. A wall of white swallowing the horizon in minutes. Wind howled through the valley like something alive, tearing at rooftops, slamming shutters open, driving snow into every crack it could find. Temperatures dropped faster than anyone had ever seen. Fire struggled. Walls creaked. Doors froze shut. In the first hour, it was chaos. In the second, it was fear. By the third, it was desperation. Inside their homes, families huddled close to weak flames that couldn't keep up. Heat bled through thin walls, vanishing into the storm outside. Men added wood faster than they ever had before. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The cold didn't just sit outside. It came in. Through wood. Through stone. Through breath itself. Up on the ridge, Elias stood by his window. The storm battered his cabin, wind screaming against the triple walls, snow piling high against the structure. But inside, it was quiet, warm, steady. The fire in his stove burned low, barely needed. He pressed his hand against the inner wall. It held, not even a whisper of cold. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, looking down toward the valley, now barely visible through the storm. He knew what was happening down there. He had seen it before. He had lived through it once. And he knew something else, too. They wouldn't last the night. A sudden pounding echoed through the storm. At first, Elias thought it was the wind. Then it came again. Harder. Closer. He moved to the door, unbolting it slowly, bracing himself against the force outside. When he pulled it open, the storm surged in. Cold, violent, blinding. And in the middle of it, a man stood there, barely upright. Jonas Hale. His face was pale, eyes wide with something that had nothing to do with pride anymore. Elias, he rasped, voice breaking in the wind. It's not holding, none of them are. Elias said nothing. Jonas took a step forward, almost collapsing. Please, he said, and for the first time since he'd climbed that ridge. There was no laughter left. Elias stepped aside without a word. Jonas stumbled inside, collapsing near the stove, his hands shaking so violently he could barely pull them close to the heat. Frost clung to his beard. His coat was stiff with ice. The door slammed shut behind them. And just like that, the storm disappeared. Not outside, but inside. The cabin held. Jonas looked around, disoriented. The walls. The stillness. The warmth that didn't feel forced or desperate, but steady, constant. How? He whispered. Elias moved past him, setting another log into the stove, though the fire barely needed it. The walls trap heat, Elias said simply. Not just from the fire. From us. From the day. From everything. Jonas stared at the inner wall, then reached out slowly, pressing his palm against it. His expression shifted. It's warm, he said, almost confused. It doesn't let the cold through. Jonas let out a breath that turned into something close to a laugh, but it broke halfway. They're freezing down there, he said. Fires won't hold. Wind's getting in everywhere. We tried sealing doors, stuffing cloth, mud, anything, he swallowed. It's not enough. Elias already knew. How many, he asked. Jonas hesitated. All of us, he said finally. The words hung heavy in the room. Elias looked toward the door. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he moved. He grabbed his coat, wrapped a thick scarf around his neck, and lifted a lantern from the table. Jonas blinked. What are you doing? Opening the cabin. Jonas stared at him. You can't fit everyone in here. No, Elias said. But I can keep them alive long enough to think. He opened the door again. The storm slammed into him like a wall, but he stepped through it anyway. Jonas hesitated only a second before following. The descent down the ridge was brutal. Wind pushed against them, snow blinded them, and more than once Jonas nearly lost his footing. But Elias moved like he knew every step, because he did. When they reached the first house, the door was already half frozen shut. Elias forced it open. Inside, the cold hit harder than the storm. A family huddled near a dying fire, their breaths visible, their faces pale and still. Get up, Elias said, firm and clear. You're coming with us. No one argued. There wasn't enough strength left for pride. House by house, they moved through the valley. Some resisted at first, confused, disoriented, but it didn't last. Not when they stepped outside and felt what the storm had truly become. Each trip up the ridge was harder than the last. More people, more weight, more time. But Elias never rushed. He kept the group small, controlled, manageable. Inside the cabin, he organized them quickly. Stay close to the walls, he instructed. Layer yourselves. Share heat. The space filled, then tightened, then filled again. At some point, it stopped feeling like a cabin and started feeling like something else. A refuge. A system. A solution no one had believed in, until now. The fire remained low. It didn't need to burn high. That was the difference. By the time Elias made his final trip, the valley had gone silent. No more movement. No more lights. Just the storm. He stood at the base of the ridge for a moment, scanning through the white. Nothing. Then he turned back. The climb up felt longer this time. He was tired now. Not just from the storm, but from the weight of what he had seen in those homes. The thin walls. The failing fires. The quiet fear that had replaced every ounce of confidence they once carried. When he reached the cabin, Jonas opened the door before he could knock. Inside, it was crowded. Dozens of people pressed together, wrapped in blankets, sitting shoulder to shoulder. But they were alive, warm, breathing steadily. Elias stepped in and closed the door behind him. For a moment, no one spoke. They just looked at him. The man they had laughed at. The man they had dismissed. The man who had built something none of them understood, until they needed it. Jonas stepped forward. His voice was quiet now, stripped of everything it had been before. You saved them, he said. Elias shook his head. I built this, he replied. That's all. Jonas looked around the cabin again. The walls, the structure, the design that had turned a simple idea into survival. No, he said. You saw what we didn't. Elias didn't answer. He moved to the stove, adjusting it slightly, then leaned back against the wall. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, it didn't matter anymore. Hours passed, then more. No one froze. No one slipped into silence. The cabin held exactly as it was meant to. By morning, the wind had died. The storm didn't end dramatically. It simply stopped. Elias opened the door slowly. Cold air rushed in, but it was nothing like before. Just winter now. Normal. Manageable. The valley below was buried. Roofs bent under the weight of snow. Chimneys clogged. Doors sealed shut. Homes that had stood strong for years now looked fragile. Temporary. People stepped out behind him, one by one. They stood in silence, looking down at what remained. Then, slowly, their eyes turned back to the cabin. Not with curiosity this time. Not with amusement. With understanding. Days later, when the snow began to melt and life started to move again, something had changed. Men didn't laugh anymore. They came up the ridge with tools. With questions. With respect. How did you build it? One asked. What did you use between the walls? Another said. Elias showed them. Not everything, but enough. Because this time, they were ready to listen. By the end of winter, new cabins began rising across the valley. Thicker, stronger, smarter. And at the top of the ridge, Elias's triple-walled cabin stood exactly as it always had. Unmoved, unshaken, no longer a joke, now a standard. Because in that valley, they had all learned the same thing. The hard way. Strength isn't proven when things are easy. It's proven when everything else fails. And when that moment comes, only what was built right survives.